I'm coming to you from Oregon, USA. Yes, that's right, 3 cheers. We get the question often, people that know a little bit about Oregon, they say, well, I hear mushrooms or psilocybin's legal in Oregon. And I say, well, yes, that's true, but with an asterisk. So the purpose of my talk is to really get into the meat of that asterisk and why we're legal but still quite primitive in our approach. You know, that road there, Timmy had those beautiful linear slides that everything goes linear, but then I noticed Francisca had the winding road, and for me it is the long winding road for reaching this state where we can actually administer psilocybin in a safe, regulated space, the proper setting. How did that come about? Well, it wasn't the politicians that brought it to us, I can assure you of that. We have an interesting process. I don't know how widespread it is across the globe, but we have citizen-initiated voter ballot initiatives. In 2017 or so, a couple therapists started designing an initiative measure that created a therapeutic mechanism for our psilocybin program. Wanted to elaborate a little bit about this voter ballot initiative. It's only possible in about 35-40% of the U.S. states. The voters aren't trusted to do the right thing. And Oregon, because of its either foolhardiness or progressive nature, probably a combination of both, was chosen by political action groups, organizations, interested parties to float this measure before the voters. And this was in 1920. Other examples of these initiatives have been our Medical Aid in Dying initiative, which was about 30 years ago. It continues to serve about 300 or 400 patients a year. Also at the same time in 2020, this will show up on the next slide, the timeline, but we passed another measure that decriminalized all drugs with the thought that the money from the cannabis taxes would go towards treatment options and therapy options. However, the measure passed. There were no criminal penalties anymore for any drugs. But the other half of the program never got going. There was no money directed towards the treatment. And so it got out of control, and last year the measure was repealed by the legislature. Here's a kind of a breakdown of that timeline. Tom and Sherry Eckert started the initiative process by going around lobbying, writing this business, and raising awareness in 2015. So that's the long part of the winding road, 10 years, and it percolated through the process to reach the ballot in 2020. Passed pretty decisively. In our country, a 55% majority is a near an overwhelming victory. But even more interesting, the decriminalization measure had quite a bit more support. The measure provided for 2 years of a ramp up to deliver services. They created the Oregon Health Authority, which manages all manner of healthcare in Oregon, took on the unenviable task of creating a program, created an Office of Psilocybin Services, and which was staffed with state workers, but they relied on a panel of 12 or 14 experts of all persuasions, mycologists, psychologists, addiction specialists, and the like, that spent 2 years devising I don't know how many pages of regulations and rules. And that conversion from the ballot measure into the rules has been what's really interesting, created a lot of gray zones. because then our Department of Justice had a rule on these things. But the whole program was kind of created from scratch, completely devoid of any academic input, except for some of the folks that were on the advisory board that were professors of internal medicine and addiction treatment. It still didn't go over real big with most of the state. 2/3 of the counties had elections 2 years later that they decided, even though the voters of the county, the voters had passed it, they threw the measure up again a couple years later, affected by the pandemic. So they opted out of the program. They were given the eligibility to opt out. So essentially what we're left with are islands of treatment availability. We're also not allowed to call it treatment because it hasn't been established that it's actually therapeutic. So we don't call our clients patients, they're referred to as clients. It took 2 years of planning to get the rules out, and then another 4 or 5 months to really get the licensing process going. And the first licenses were granted in early, maybe wrong there, I get the years mixed up, but basically about 2 years ago they were granted. And Service Center opened a couple months later. That's what we call our administration areas, or completely out of the hospital. They were restricted from being in hospitals or hospices, nursing homes, or anything. So we ended up creating a number of mom and pop sort of service centers is the term, and usually consisting of 3 or 4 treatment rooms, all very comfortably. Sorry, I don't have a picture of one, but they're very relaxing, and it's a medicalized model without being really medical. And the clients come in, they get comfortable, get administered, which is I'll talk about in a minute, get administered their dose, and have their journey attended at all times by a licensed facilitator. This kind of sums up, this slide sums up some of the things I just mentioned. It is restricted to only psilocybe cubensis. We're not allowed to use any of the other any other plants, and that's good because that's consistent. And I've got here a label of one of our packaged products. It's all given out in doses. And it was tough to get going early on with the dosing because most people are, well, people in the naturalistic realm. You know, I had a handful of mushrooms. I took those. It was great. Wasn't so great, whatever. And they think of grams, you know, grams of dried mushrooms, grams of dried fungi. But we went the route of going psilocybin content, milligrams of psilocybin per gram of fungi. And they run, as you can see there, anywhere from 2 to 4 milligrams per gram to up to 6 or 7 and 8. And this is one of the newer varieties, Pumpkin Hillbilly. Anyone knows anything about the various strains? It started off with Golden Teacher and some of the more traditional strains. We got more sophisticated with the analysis as time went on, thanks to the fellow who runs the lab, and we realized it was very important to give credence to the fact that psilocin is much more powerful than psilocybin. So there's a conversion factor of 1.4 to 1, with psilocin being the greater number. So we now measure things in terms of total psilocybin equivalent, and that's gotten us. I'd say that's the biggest benefit of the Oregon program, is that we're getting pretty precise with dosages, and that we're able to really know what the difference is between giving someone 20 milligrams of psilocybin and, say, 40 or 50 milligrams. Initially, it was felt that 50 milligrams was going to be necessary for a lot of clients. That was way too much. The way we determined that was with internal testing. trained facilitators would set up dyads with other facilitators inside the service centers, and we'd guide each other through journeys and then switch roles the next day or the next week and to try to get some idea. And we quickly determined that the ideal therapeutic dose seemed to be about 25 to 35 milligrams, and that people that got 50 milligrams, one unfortunate gentleman in his 80s spent 13 hours in the treatment room before he could be released to go home, and had all sorts of somatic issues as well. But interested in the end, thought it was the greatest thing in his life. So you just don't know until you find out. This graphic is interesting because they were focused on the neurodivergent crowd and people that don't learn so well verbally, and created this sort of cartoon pamphlet that sort of describes our program pretty well, probably better than I'm doing. But we have licensed manufacturers. I think there's 12 now. And I don't know how many of you noticed the backdrop of the Hoffman stage. It's those industrial shells with the magic bags with the mushrooms growing out of them, or something that looked an awfully a lot like mushrooms. And that's what the growers have. The first licensed grower in the state was a woman, single parent, who in one of the rooms in her home just set up a little grow room like that, and she produces a significant amount of product for the state. And over time, more people have come on board with that. So we all have it's sort of a cottage industry right now, because the rules were written such that people from out of state couldn't really access or get involved in the program, except as clients, of course, and they were required to be Oregon residents. So now, after 2 years, some of the other big programs are coming in, and we're educating their facilitators. We're doing their practicums where they're doing the same sort of dyad type arrangement, excuse me, that we did. And so it's an iterative process. But once again, as I say, a long and winding road. Here's where we are right now, at least as the end of last month. We have 10 manufacturers. Unfortunately, one lab, this one fellow who's really quite motivated, has a lab that does all sorts of environmental testing. And he's sort of a one-man crusade against the Oregon Health Authority. But if he quits, it's going to shut down the program. And so we try to encourage him to stay with the thing. And it's not a matter of, nobody in this business is really making any money right now, which is okay. But he needs to make enough to stay alive. And to stay alive, he has to do asbestos testing and other forms of environmental radon testing and things like that. So it's a matter of altruism for him that he does this, and personal interest. What's really interesting is he's the one who really pushed this thing about the total psilocybin equivalent, and because he realized pretty quickly that it's not one-to-one with psilocybin and psilocin, and the different strains have different strengths of each. So we tend to seek out now the strains with the higher doses of psilocin, because you seem to get a lot more bang for the buck. Most of you probably know that psilocybin is the prodrug, and the metabolite is psilocin, and that's really what the active ingredient is. There's been a lot of talk about cost. Our average cost for treatment is the low end. That's pretty low, $1,200. High end could be $10,000. It depends on the clientele. All these rich people come up from California to be healed, and they have that sort of money. But there's really good provisions made for social equity programs and sliding scales and all that sort of thing. So personally, I've facilitated clients for nothing and up to, say, $1,500. But then the client has to pay the service center another fee, which ranges anywhere from $500 to $2,000 for a one-day session. And then the medication, the medicine, is paid for separately, cash only, thanks to the government, much like our cannabis industry in the U.S., which right now is about $5 per milligram. So you're looking for the medicine itself, it's really about $200, maybe at the high end, $250. And that's about as low as that's probably going to go, because the service centers need to mark it up a little bit. It's obviously very cheap to make. It doesn't take that much space, nothing like cannabis. The workers is a little interesting hook. All of us facilitators have to be workers. Workers are the only ones that can really touch the product. I don't touch it because I have an MD license and a DEA license, which I want to keep, ultimately hoping that it'll be rescheduled in my lifetime, but perhaps not. And the training programs, there's currently 20 of them. They come and go because of the cost of running a business is quite a bit. We've also feel like we've saturated the market a little bit right now. So there's basically 374 facilitators, but every one of them is also a licensed worker, so that we can, it gets complicated, but really the medicine's kept in safes and you have to access it and sign in and out. It's video monitored and the whole business for a few little boxes of psilocybin coming in those plain brown wrappers that I showed you. The biggest tragedy I see is we've had somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 clients to date, but we have no solid data. We really don't know if anything is working other than anecdotally. And that's a tragedy. We're working to correct that, but people were so skittish about going public about this because of the stigma. They had government jobs, they worked for school systems and whatnot, and would have instantly lost their jobs had word gotten out that they were, down in Oregon doing psilocybin. In the first year and a half or so, 80% of our clients came from out of state, and a small percent came from out of the country. With the change in weather, it's interesting, the international travel, cross-country travel dropped down, so we're really focusing on our local population. My particular mission is to introduce other physicians and healthcare providers to the experience, so it's more of an experiential journey for them rather than a therapeutic journey, which it is for the vast majority of our clients. It's not that hard to, just go out and have mushrooms and go to a festival or whatever with your friends, and so, and then all bets are off. The efforts we made to collect data are starting to come to fruition. And our local medical school, the Oregon Health Science University, has started a program. It's called Open Oregon Psychedelic Experience Network or something like that. It's enrolled 66 patients to date out of 8,000 to 10,000 clients that we've had. And that's what I say. Other than the cost, I see those as our two biggest problems. I'm not going to go through each of these bullet points here, but each one of them has come up to be a stumbling block. One of the biggest stumbling blocks is that the whole system was modeled on our cannabis regulation industry. We have an Oregon Liquor Control Board, which took over the responsibility for the cannabis industry, and then similarly now with the psilocybin program. And it's far from ideal. The cannabis industry went kind of crazy cowboy frontier. There's plantations with slave labor in Southern Oregon. The police are understaffed and afraid to even go into. So there's just a lot of black market cannabis, which has really spooked the populace and especially the county commissioners. The ideal setting for this, I think, is a retreat center. There's only 2 available in Oregon right now, and they were initially designed to be out in nature, near a city for in case of any medical emergency comes up, but to do your forest bathing, come there, get to know a group, do some preparation, have a small dose administration session, the next day for integration and self-care type things, and then a bigger dose on the fourth day, and then another day of integration on the fifth day. It's a great program, very lovely, good results. Cost about $8,000 to $10,000 for those 5 days, so accessible only to very few people. Keep turning around, but the great monitor right up here, I should. We get a lot of information from the underground providers, primarily due to that lack of collected data and reports. So I really work closely with those folks and try to have them inform me, because they've been doing this for decades. But the one thing they say is that their underground clients were so much different than the clients that come to us from out of state with huge burdens of mental health disease. And so it's really kind of apples and oranges in that respect between what the underground folks are doing. But they have a lot more flexibility. For example, they've learned that for dealing with trauma, particularly, that they get them warmed up with a low dose of what they call heart medicine, MDMA, and then after that sort of takes effect and kind of loosens the mind, then they give a therapeutic dose of psilocybin. That seems to be becoming increasingly popular. In the festival circuit, they're doing all this sort of flipping, as they call it, between all the various psychedelics, and there's no data on that except what we see in the crisis clinics at the festivals. And there you're really dealing with polypharmacy, people ingesting substances that they don't know exactly what they are. A lot of times they don't even know they're getting them. And those are the ones that are sure to end up in the down tent. What's another good one here? The government makes it very difficult for us to make any money. There's some IRS tax issues that everything we do is considered profiting through the drug industry, the illegal drug industry. And so we have no way to deduct any of our business expenses. So we pay full tax, income tax for the income we make without the usual deductions. And it's hard to find an accountant or CPA that will work with you in that, because their firms have provisions that they can't work with folks that are dealing with illegal drugs. And so on the federal level in the US, obviously psilocybin and everything else is Schedule 1. Ketamine is Schedule 3, given in controlled environments in precise doses, all manner of administration. We used just whole fungi initially. That was hard for a lot of people because of nausea. So most commonly we use we grind that fungi, the client and the worker at the center, in a coffee grinder, make a tea, sometimes strain the tea, sometimes not. The lab fellow tells me it's not important to eat to consume the product. The tea gets all the psilocybin, but some people dislike the taste of the actual mushrooms in their mouth. Now we're getting different delivery vehicles. The home chemists and fabricators are getting clever. They've used chocolate. They've made extracts and put these in chocolates, which is a really nice synergistic combination of medicines. Cacao and psilocybin seem to play really well together and potentiate each other. There's a honey. Nausea is a big problem with folks, either real or imagined, or fear of nausea. And by putting the extract in honey, you kind of overcome that. The other way we found to overcome that is what we call lemon teching, some form of acid that starts that conversion from psilocybin to psilocin. The chitin on the outer layer of the mushrooms, this seems to be what causes that nausea. And so the lemon teching sort of starts that process outside the stomach, we had a really interesting finding. These people that are on these obesity drugs, diabetes drugs, the GLP-1s, really have delayed gastric emptying. And it took us a while to figure out that it was going to be a long time before their psilocybin ingestion was in their system. One person came in, was on, I don't know which one of them, one of the injectable ones, and after 4 to 6 hours, which was the required time they need to stay in the center for their dose, they hadn't gotten liftoff, so they let them go home. And then sure enough, 2 hours later, they came full on into their psychedelic experience at home with no guide or no support. Fortunately, that only happened once because word gets out now. 1 minute. Those bells. Well, we could go on, but I've probably covered most of these things, and I'd rather have some questions. One other problem we have, I mentioned day trippers versus retreats. You can only do so much with the day trip. The other one is the dual licensure. Some people mention that in a number of things, that you need to have tiers and mentors. We don't really have that yet. Colorado's instituted that with their program, which is modeled on ours, but improved. Those are our, we don't have too many, we do have reasonable data on bad outcomes. And I'm going to get stopped here in a minute. So let's end up here. I'd really love to tell the story about the broken heart myocardial infarction that followed, which if anybody know anything about Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy, seemed to be a case of that. But anyway, I'm sorry I just rambled on as usual.